Okay, just to recap from last video, if we have the demand curve for a monopoly starting at $200 and the quantity going to 2,200 units, we could also change this to 2,000 units, 200,000 units. It doesn't really matter. It certainly doesn't have to be a 1-to-1 ratio. The thing that I want you guys to see is that it's going to be the marginal revenue curve is always going to intersect at the midpoint. Okay, so we found this out in the last video that the marginal revenue curve is going to intersect the axes at the midpoint. So now that we have our demand curve and we have our marginal revenue curve, how does a monopoly decide where to price? Well, let me get a really light curve and say, all right, let's follow this up to the demand curve. So that's the midpoint. And let's say we know that they're going to price above this point. Okay, but where do they choose to price? Now I'm just going to leave this little arrow right here and price above the midpoint. Well, monopolies are still looking to profit maximize. So that means that they have to choose the quantity that they're going to produce and sell it for whatever the market says the market is willing to buy. That's the idea of a price setter. So we don't have enough information right now to figure out where the monopolist will produce. But once we add in our marginal cost curve, that curve that kind of looks like the Nike swoosh, once we add in our marginal cost curve, we know that a monopolist will profit maximize where the marginal cost is exactly equal to the marginal revenue. Okay, so that's that point right there, just like a perfectly competitive firm. So if the marginal cost and the marginal revenue are equal at this point of, let's say, I don't know, this would be 50 down here, so let's say 70,000 units. That's their profit max quantity. That's the Q star that they're going to produce. So how much are they going to charge per unit? Well, a perfectly competitive firm would charge where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, and where demand comes into that equation too. Okay, so don't get confused in the pricing of a monopoly versus the pricing of a perfectly competitive firm. A perfectly competitive firm chooses the output at marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. They don't choose the price. A monopoly produces the output where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, and then they determine the cost, the price that they're going to sell this unit at. And the way they do that is saying, okay, this is the quantity that we're going to produce. How much are demanders willing to pay? So we take this quantity and we follow it up to the demand curve, and this is the price that they're going to charge. Okay. So in this example, this is the profit max P star, and we'll say that it's equal to $175. Okay. So now if we're looking at this, are some people willing to pay more than $175? Absolutely. Some people are willing to pay up to $190, $199.99. We know nobody's going over $200, but there is still consumer surplus. Remember, consumer surplus is the difference between the price that the individual has to pay and what they would be willing to pay. So collectively, this area up here is still our consumer surplus. Okay. Now, in a minute, we'll be able to see where profits come in for a monopoly. We'll be able to see where the profits for the monopolist would be, but we can't already say that it's this area right here. We don't know where the profits would be. The one curve that we still would need in order to determine the profits would be the same as the last time, or in the last video, is the average total cost curve. Let's say that the average total cost curve comes in, and I don't want to use that color. I'll use this a little lighter color. Okay, so then we bring in our average total cost curve. Our average total cost curve usually looks somewhat like a U, and let's say that our average total cost curve looks something like that. Average total cost. Okay, now we have enough to figure out profits. The average total cost, so just kind of a review, that profits are equal to total cost minus total revenue. Total revenue is simply price times quantity, which we can figure out very easily. So total revenue, the price would be $175 per unit times the amount that they're going to be selling, which would be $70,000. So now we need to figure out total cost. We can figure out total cost a couple different ways, but since we have average total cost, we could say that we could figure out, so I'm going to do this down here, average total cost, we could say that total cost is equal to average total cost times quantity. So the quantity we know, again, is 70,000 units, and the average total cost looks like it comes in maybe at, let's see, so this would be 100, maybe the average total cost comes in at 125. Okay, so the difference between, so average cost is $125 per unit. So profits are going to be the difference between total cost and total revenue. One additional way that we can obviously look at total cost and total revenue and profits, we can say that profits are equal to what it costs them to make the unit and what it costs them to sell the unit for times the number of units. Okay, so here the total profits would be $175, which is what they're receiving in revenue for every unit that they sell, and then the $125 that it costs them on average to make each of those 70,000 units. Okay, so that's how we're going to see where a monopoly decides to profit maximize. The last thing that we want to bring in, just to make this graph even more complicated and more colors on it, is that we do want to note that there is deadweight loss for a monopolist. The deadweight loss for a monopolist is the fact that they don't have to be as efficient as a perfectly competitive firm. So with a perfectly competitive market, we know that the more the more producers that come into a market, it's going to drive prices down and increase the efficiency, because they have to be as efficient as possible to hold on to prices. We also know that quality is going to have to be extremely high, otherwise you're going to pick a different producer, since so many producers are producing the exact same good. For a monopoly, this isn't so. So there's deadweight loss because of the fact that, one, the price is going to be increased. If it was a perfectly competitive firm, there would be zero profits in the long run. So we know that they would be producing where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, and we would see that the demand is going to be equal to that same point because there are so many other producers. Here, there's deadweight loss because of the reasons that we just went over, being that it's not efficient and the price is too high. So monopolies are the least efficient market type, and perfectly competitive firms are the most efficient.